Welcome back to HiCode tutorial. This video is about Actions Group. First, I will give you an introduction on Actions Group, and then we'll look at the Actions Groups without parameters and those with parameters. And finally, we'll look at Actions Group callback. So first, for the introduction part, you can find Actions Group widget on the right side in your editor in the Logical Widgets bar. An Actions Group is a pack of workflow containing multiple groups of target and action. We pack up events in an Actions Group so that when we need them, we'll only need to call the Actions Group. In this way, we reduce repetition and the complexity of the project. It makes the project logic easier to follow and also makes the project easier to maintain. Let's first add an Actions Group in our object tree. And for this video, we'll continue to use the number guessing game example which we made from the previous videos. We can find the Actions Group widget on the right side of the editor in this Logical Widgets bar. Select a parent for it and add. An Actions Group panel resembles that of an event, but the only trigger it has is this call actions, which means when it is called, it will perform the following actions immediately. We can also set input and output parameters for an Actions Group. But first thing, we will look at Actions Groups without parameters. Action Groups without parameters simply pack up workflow for reuse. They do not take any input or output parameters. In other words, they do not receive data, nor do they return values. A typical no-parameter Actions Group can be one for initialization. It may contain a group of actions for example, clearing or resetting values, getting time, and so on. In this application, for example, when I click on this replay button, it generates another random number, clears the input box, and resets the value of the result. Those are basically initializing this number guessing game, so we can copy them all and go to the Actions Group, paste them inside here. Rename this Actions Group to Initialize. And go back to the replay button. We can hide this original event, add another one when it is clicked, and call this Actions Group. Also, we need to initialize when the page is first displayed. Call this Actions Group. Okay, so when you are reading the workflow of a project and you encountered an Actions Group like this, you can click this Jump To button, this arrow, to jump to the Actions Group and read the logic inside. And you can go back with this button to where you're previously working on. We can preview to check if the project still works. Start a guess from 50. It says too small, so 75. Still too small. And 88. Too large. Too small. Okay. Too small. Correct. And when I click this Renew button, it clears the result and clears this input box. And it's now supposed to give us a new random number. Therefore, the Actions Group achieved the same result as what we have previously done inside this replay button. And now you've seen how an Actions Group without parameters works. And that is the basics of Actions Groups. Let's move on to those with parameters. If calculation is involved, add parameters to Actions Group and it will allow us to receive raw data from input and return results via its output parameters. And you can customize by yourself the input and output parameters to adapt to different scenarios. For example, sometimes you will only need input parameters, but you don't need any outputs. And you can have multiple inputs or multiple outputs. That is all allowed. I will show you how to use actions group with parameters on a new page. Create a page 2. And I'm going to make a simplest calculator. First, add the user interface. I will need 2 input boxes to take the values for the calculator. And I will need a plus sign. I will use an icon for that. It is by default a plus sign. Copy this. And set this row to horizontal alignment center and vertical alignment center. Give them some margins on their left. And name this one to be input 2. Okay. Clear the placeholder. And clear the background color of this row. Then we'll need to display the result inside the text. Set this page to vertical horizontal alignment to the center. Also, I will need a button. This button will read Run. And this will be the result. And set the 2 input boxes input type to decimals. And now we will use the actions group to perform this calculation. So call it calculate. And since we need to calculate the sum of these 2 values, we will need 2 input parameters. For now, we will leave this output parameters blank. We don't need any. And the target would be directly the result. Set its value to. In this drop-down list, you can find the parameters, the input parameters you defined. Parameter 1 and plus, drop-down list, parameter 2. Next, we will call this actions group by clicking this button. When it is clicked, just select this actions group. And now it is awaiting input for the 2 input parameters. So select the first input box for the parameter 1 and the second input box for parameter 2. The workflow goes like this. When this run button is clicked, we send the input box's value to parameter 1 and parameter 2 of this actions group. And the actions group receives these 2 values, adds them, and set the result to the text. Let's go to preview and try it out. Because we're on page 2, so preview this current page. And let's go with 1 plus 2 equals to 3. Just now directly gave the sum to this text called result. Another way to do this is to add an output parameter, for example sum, to store this result so that we can use this value elsewhere, not only for this text box. So how do we output the result? For this action, select current actions group. And it led us to set the output parameters. So set this output parameter sum to parameter 1 plus parameter 2. These 2 operands are consistent with the parameters we defined here. If I change this, for example, I will have to change this too. See, it changes to 3. Change it back. And then we need to update the event for this run button. And because I've added an output parameter to the actions group, when I select it, it now has this callback available. Click callback, and it says completed. It means that when this calculation is done, and when the output is ready, it should set the value for this result again. The value should be, now you can find inside this drop-down list result, sum, which is the output parameter we have defined in the actions group. Preview again. You can define the input and output parameters according to your preference or need. For example, I can add an output parameter and call it diff. So this one will be the subtraction of parameter 1 and parameter 2. For this result, I will copy one, and this one will be the sum, and this one will be the subtraction result. And inside this run button, add another action, the same result, and because I've added an output parameter, it is shown here. Take parameters 6 and 4, and then the sum is 10, difference is 2. Also, when I've selected this actions group, the left side widget bar is left with this variables widget. There's a separate video on these variable widgets, so I won't go into them, but we can try to add one to this actions group. For example, this time variable widget. I can add an action in the actions group and get current time using this time variable widget. Go to page 2 and add another text for time display. This one is for time. Actions group. Set another output parameter for time. This will be the value of this variable. Set this time variable before it is used. And let's go to this button. When it's completed, set the time to result.time. Preview. Take 6 and 4 again. Run, and it gives us the current time. I want to use this time variable inside this actions group to show you that this is a local variable and it can only be accessed by its parent. In other words, this actions group. It cannot be accessed outside this actions group. For example, I want to directly link this time to this time variable. If I attempt to choose it, it will say local variable can only be accessed by the current service, transaction, or function group. But it won't have any problem with me if I want to access it inside the actions group. And that is all about the actions group with parameters. And next we'll talk about actions group callback. We won't be using actions group callback that often before we get to know about services. But since I'm talking about actions group, it's better to mention them along with it. So when I select this actions group, you can see this callback widget lights up. Add one to the actions group, and here I can define the status and parameters. For example, I can add a status called calculation succeed. and add the parameters. Another one. For the parameter 1, I will call it the result of add. And this one will be the result of subtraction. Go back to the actions group. So how do we use this callback we've just added? We can first delete this one and replace it with the callback. So delete and select the callback we've just defined. It has an action called fire callback. And set the two parameters. This will be parameter 1 plus parameter 2, and this will be the subtraction. Okay. And also we'll have to update the callback inside the run button. Originally we have completed, but as we have just defined a new status, we can find the new status calculation succeed. Well, we can delete this callback and use a new one. Select calculation succeed, and target again will be the sum. The action will still be set value, result, and this time we won't be using this sum. Instead, we'll be using this result of adding from the callback we've just made. Same for the diff target, set its value and result res sub. We'll hide this time text and go to preview. And 12 and 6 equals to 18 and 6. So this is how we use actions callback to complete the calculation. So what's the point of using this action callback? It can help us to add different logical branches. Let me give you an example. Say I want this actions group to calculate even numbers only. If the two inputs are not even numbers, it will not perform the calculation. So how do we realize that? We can add another callback and name it to failed, and also here the status failed. Next, we need to add some conditions inside this actions group. For example, a condition if the parameter 1 is even and parameter 2 should also be an even number. We will move on to this calculation succeed only in this case. Well, otherwise, else, we will use this callback of failed. Fire this callback function. And then update the workflow for this button. Click this actions group and add another callback, select failed. And in this case, we will show the user a message, show toast, and tell them to use even numbers. If I try to use, for example, 15 and 7, I hit run. It says, please enter even numbers, and the sum and diff displays didn't change at all. And when I change it to 12 and 8, and now it performs the calculation for us. So what actions group callbacks do is to add logical branches to your actions groups. And you can customize these logical branches so that it will make your workflow more readable. With the help of these callbacks, you can write the conditions inside the actions group. And that is all for this video. Thank you for watching.